I'm Lieutenant Sarah Blake, 31 years old, and I worked my way up from a mechanic's daughter to a Navy officer trusted with million-dollar aircraft. For years, I followed every rule, backed my team, and carried the weight of discipline on my shoulders. But the day I broke protocol to protect a scared child on my deck, everything changed. Have you ever been punished for doing the right thing? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever stood your ground when it could have cost you everything, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about integrity, courage, and knowing when to draw the line. What happened next still shocks me to this day. I had been stationed aboard the USS Vigilant, a Nimitz-class carrier, as Lieutenant Blake, aircraft maintenance officer. The rank sat on my collar like earned weight. 3 years of proving I belonged in a world that hadn't always wanted me there. Long hours, tight routines, and a chain of command that prized precision over compassion. That was the Navy I knew. That was the Navy I respected. It started with small things: how the new executive officer, Commander Holt, ran the deck. No deviations, no questions, no exceptions. He'd arrived 6 months prior with a spotless record and a reputation for efficiency that bordered on ruthless. The crew called him the machine behind his back, though never loud enough for him to hear. He called empathy weakness, and he said it often enough that we all knew he meant it. I'd tried to stay under his radar. Head down, work done, no complaints. But the ship was a small world, and Holt had opinions about everyone, especially female officers. He once told me during a maintenance brief, "You're smart, Blake. Just don't let your heart write checks your rank can't cash." I'd nodded and moved on, but the words stuck like oil on steel. One evening during flight drills, the deck was chaos in the controlled way only a carrier can manage. Jets screaming, crews moving in choreographed precision, the smell of fuel and salt thick in the air. I was supervising a turbine inspection near Hangar Bay 2 when I spotted something that didn't belong: a small figure near the bay doors, barefoot, pale, staring at the jets like he'd stepped into another world. My first thought was hallucination. Fatigue does strange things at sea. But he was real. A boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing civilian clothes that looked too clean for where he was standing. His eyes were wide with terror, and he hadn't moved since I'd noticed him. Security was supposed to sweep the area before lockdown. They'd missed him. Or he'd slipped through. Either way, he was in one of the most dangerous places on the ship. I radioed it in immediately. "Control, this is Blake. I have an unidentified minor in Hangar Bay 2. Requesting immediate guidance." The response came fast and sharp. Holt's voice cut through the static. "Containment breach? You mean you found a stowaway?" "Negative, sir. A child. He appears lost. Secure the area." "I'm on my way." The boy still hadn't moved. I approached slowly, hands visible, voice calm. "Hey there. You okay?" He looked at me with eyes that had seen something worse than jets and noise. He didn't speak. Just reached out and clung to my sleeve with both hands, fingers digging into the fabric like I was the only solid thing in his world. Instinct overrode procedure. I knew Holt was coming. I knew what he'd do: by the book, no exceptions, protocol first. But something about this kid's silence screamed wrong. Not lost. Hiding. I guided him quickly into the tool room adjacent to the hangar and locked the door behind us. The space was cramped, smelling of grease and metal, but it was quiet. Safe, for the moment. My team had seen me. Chief Petty Officer Morales, my senior enlisted, caught my eye from across the deck. He gave the smallest nod and turned his attention back to his work. They knew what it meant to go off protocol, especially under Holt. They also knew me well enough to trust one had a reason. Inside the tool room, I knelt down to the boy's level. "What's your name?" "Nothing." He just stared at me, still gripping my sleeve. "Are you hurt?" A small shake of his head. "Can you tell me how you got here?" His lips moved, but no sound came out. Fear had locked his voice away. I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. I wasn't going to hand him over to Holt without understanding what I was dealing with. Something about his eyes. This wasn't a kid who'd wandered off by accident. This was a kid who'd run from something. That night, I hit him. I wrapped him in my jacket, fed him from my personal rations, crackers, an energy bar, a juice box I'd been saving. He ate mechanically, still silent, still watching me like I might vanish if he looked away. "You're safe here," I told him, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "I'm going to figure this out, okay?" He nodded. Just once. When Holt discovered a head count didn't match during the evening muster, he went ballistic. I heard him over the 1MC, the ship-wide intercom, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Who's covering up a security breach on my deck? Someone knows something. Step forward now, and the consequences will be minimal. Wait for me to find you, and they won't be." I stayed in my quarters, the boy hidden in my locker with strict instructions to stay quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the walls had ears. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone talked, or Holt's investigation led him to the right door. Lieutenant Harper, my fellow officer, and the closest thing I had to a friend aboard, found me in the passageway near midnight. "Blake, what did you do?" "Nothing I wouldn't do again." She looked at me like I'd just jumped overboard. "Holt is tearing this ship apart. He knows someone broke protocol. If he finds out it's you, he will." "Then why are you doing this?" I thought about that boy's eyes. About the way he grabbed my sleeve like I was his last hope. About my father's voice in my head, the lessons that had shaped me: structure, pride, consequence. And the other lesson, the one he'd given me quietly, away from the uniform: "You're not a machine." "Because something's wrong," I said finally. "And I need to know what before I hand him over to a system that might not care." Harper shook her head. "You're going to lose everything over this." "I know." She walked away without another word. I didn't blame her. Self-preservation was a survival skill in the Navy, and I'd just thrown mine overboard. When I returned to my quarters, the boy was exactly where I'd left him, curled in the darkness of my locker, still awake. I sat on the floor beside him and spoke quietly. "Tomorrow, they're going to find you. And when they do, people are going to ask you questions. You don't have to be afraid. Just tell them the truth, okay?" He looked at me with those two old eyes and whispered his first words to me. "Don't tell anyone I'm here." My chest tightened. Why not? But he'd gone silent again, and I knew I wouldn't get more tonight. I stayed awake until 0400 hours, listening to the rhythm of the ship, knowing my time was running out. The next morning, Holt cornered me near the flight line. The sun was barely up, the deck still wet with overnight condensation. His jaw was set, his eyes cold and certain. "Lieutenant Blake, you running a daycare now?" His tone wasn't a question. It was an accusation wrapped in military courtesy. "Sir, don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what I'm talking about." He'd found the boy. I didn't know how, but I saw it in his posture, the way he stood blocking my path with 2 Master-at-Arms personnel flanking him. They looked uncomfortable, which meant they knew this wasn't standard procedure. "Where is he?" I asked. "Supply crate 14, Hangar Bay 2. Asleep. Been there all night, apparently." Holt stepped closer, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. "You want to explain to me how an unidentified miner ends up hidden on my deck while my aircraft maintenance officer plays hide and seek?" "I was trying to assess the situation before escalating, sir." "Assess?" His laugh was sharp enough to cut. "You violated Naval Security Code Article 92. Failure to obey a lawful order. You were ordered to secure the area. Instead, you concealed evidence of a security breach. You're finished, Blake." The words landed like they were supposed to: final, absolute, career-ending. I felt them settle into my bones, but I didn't look away. "The child was terrified, sir. I made a judgment call. You made an emotional decision that compromised the security of this vessel and everyone on it." He gestured to the MPs. "Escort Lieutenant Blake to her quarters. Confine her there pending formal inquiry. I want her clearance suspended immediately." They moved toward me. I didn't resist. There was no point. "Sir, what about the boy?" Holt's expression didn't change. "He's an intruder. He'll be processed through base security and handed over to appropriate authorities. He's a child. He's an unidentified person in a restricted military zone. The distinction doesn't matter." He paused, and something almost like satisfaction crossed his face. "You're insubordinate, Blake. Always have been. This just proves it." As the MPs led me away, I looked back toward the hangar. I could see them bringing him out, a small figure wrapped in a gray navy blanket, his face streaked with tears. He saw me too. Reached out. One of the shore patrol officers pulled his hand down gently, said something I couldn't hear. Within 2 hours, I was confined to quarters. My security clearance was suspended. My access to shipboard systems gone. My nameplate removed from the duty roster. Word spread faster than I'd expected, carried through the ship's invisible network of whispers and speculation. The maintenance crew avoided eye contact when they passed my hatch. Pilots I'd worked with for years suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Even Harper didn't visit. I sat on my bunk and watched through the small porthole as shore patrol escorted the boy off the ship. He was so small against the gray backdrop of the pier, swallowed by adults and procedures and paperwork. I tried to ask the guard at my door where they were taking him. He pretended not to hear. That night, I signed my statement. The legal officer, a lieutenant commander I'd never met, slid the paper across my small desk without ceremony. Standard acknowledgement of charges. You have the right to counsel. I don't need counsel. I know what I did. He raised an eyebrow. You're admitting guilt? I'm accepting responsibility for my actions. There's a difference. I wrote in clear block letters. I accept full responsibility for my decisions regarding the minor found in Hangar Bay 2 on the evening of date. My actions were based on my assessment of immediate circumstances and the safety of the individual involved. I understood the protocols I was expected to follow. I chose a different course. The legal officer read it, frowned, then collected the document. Commander Holt will be pleased. He's pushing for your discharge under gross negligence. This statement won't help your case. It's the truth. The truth doesn't always save you, Lieutenant. After he left, Holt himself appeared at my hatch. The guard let him through without question. He stood in my doorway, arms crossed, satisfaction barely concealed behind his professional mask. I'll make sure the Admiral hears about your compassion, he said. Maybe they'll put it in your file. Right next to the discharge papers. Is that all, sir? That's all, Lieutenant. Enjoy your last few days in uniform. He left. I sat in the silence of my quarters and tried to feel regret. I couldn't find it. Not for helping that boy. Not for trusting my instincts over procedure. If this was the cost of staying human in a system built on rigid rules, then I'd pay it. I just wished I knew whether the boy was safe. Whether my gamble had meant anything at all, or if I'd simply delayed the inevitable while destroying my career in the process. Outside my porthole, the ocean rolled dark and endless, indifferent to human choices and their consequences. I joined the Navy at 23, straight out of engineering school. It wasn't a backup plan or a desperate choice, it was the plan. My father was enlisted, a chief petty officer who'd spent 28 years in service before retiring with a chest full of ribbons and a pension that would never make us rich, but kept us steady. I grew up on bases, moving every few years, watching carriers sail like cities across the sea. He taught me structure, pride, and consequence. In the Navy, you don't break rules, he'd say while we walked the pier at sunset. You're the rules. You embody them. That's what the uniform means. I believed him. I still do, mostly. But he also taught me something else. Something quieter that he only said when my mother wasn't around to correct him. You're not a machine, Sarah. Don't let them make you one. By 31, I'd worked my way to lieutenant, 03, aircraft maintenance officer aboard one of the most prestigious carriers in the fleet. No shortcuts, no favors. Every commendation earned in salt and steel, every promotion board survived on merit and midnight oil. I was proud of that record. It was proof that my father's lessons had taken root. Commander Holt had arrived 6 months before the incident with the boy. He came with a spotless service record, a degree from the Naval Academy, and a reputation for running the tightest deck operations in the fleet. On paper, he was impressive. In person, he was something else, polished and precise, with a temper nobody dared write down in official reports. Our first real interaction came during a maintenance brief. I'd flagged a hydraulic issue on one of the aft divided by a -18S that would delay its return to flight status by 48 hours. Holt had looked at me like I'd personally sabotaged the aircraft. 48 hours is unacceptable, Lieutenant. We have operational readiness standards to maintain. Sir, the hydraulic line is compromised. If we rush the repair and it fails during flight, I'm not interested in hypotheticals. I'm interested in solutions. The solution is doing it right, sir. That takes time. His jaw had tightened. You're smart, Blake. Just don't let your heart write checks your rank can't cash. I'd let it go. Picked my battles. Learned to present information in ways that felt like his idea. It was exhausting, but it worked until it didn't. Holt thought female officers were too emotional for command. He never said it outright in official settings, but it came through in 1,000 small ways. The way he'd double-check my work, but not male officers at the same rank. The way he'd interrupt me in briefings, but let others finish. The way he'd joke about maternal instincts when I advocated for crew welfare issues. I told myself it didn't matter. Results spoke louder than bias. If I did my job well enough, he'd have to respect me. That's what I believed right up until I found that boy on the deck. When I saw him standing there, barefoot, terrified, so completely out of place, I heard my father's voice clearly. Every rule exists for a reason, Sarah. But you're not a machine. The bond with that kid wasn't about pity or some misplaced maternal feeling Holt would have accused me of. It was recognition. He was scared the same way new recruits are scared when they first step onto a ship, silent, trying to be invisible, hoping if they stay small enough, the danger won't see them. I knew that fear. I'd felt it myself at 23, walking onto my first duty station with my father's warnings in my ears and the weight of his legacy on my shoulders. Someone had helped me then, a female lieutenant commander who'd taken time to explain the unwritten rules, who'd treated me like I belonged before I believed it myself. That connection cost me everything. And sitting in my quarters under confinement, waiting for the administrative axe to fall, I still didn't regret it. Not then. Not now. Because the Navy my father loved, the one worth serving, wasn't just about following orders. It was about judgment. About knowing when the rules served their purpose and when they failed the moment in front of you. Holt would never understand that. He saw the uniform as armor, the regulations as walls. I saw them as foundations, necessary, but not sufficient. Structure without conscience was just another form of tyranny. My father had known that too, even if he'd never said it in those words. He'd bent rules when he needed to, made judgment calls that saved lives and sometimes careers. He'd retired as a chief, not an officer, but men twice his rank had come to his funeral and called him one of the finest sailors they'd ever served with. I thought about him constantly during those 3 days of confinement. Wondered what he'd say if he could see me now. Probably something like, "Well, Sarah, you sure picked a hell of a hill to die on." But he'd understand. I was certain of that. Because underneath all the rules and regulations and uniform code, he'd taught me the one lesson that mattered most. Your conscience has to sleep in the same rack you do. And mine was sleeping fine, even as my career burned down around me. The boy's face stayed with me. The way he'd grabbed my sleeve. The way he'd whispered, "Don't tell anyone I'm here." There was a story there, something more than a kid wandering off during a base tour. I'd never know what it was now. That bothered me more than losing my commission. But I'd made my choice. And given the same circumstances, I'd make it again. That had to be enough. 3 days in confinement feels longer than 3 months at sea. The walls of my quarters seemed to close in by inches, the small porthole my only connection to the world beyond. They'd stripped my nameplate from the hangar roster. My locker had been cleared out, my personal effects inventoried and boxed like I was already gone. I replayed it endlessly in those 72 hours. Should I have called it in sooner? Trusted the system to handle a frightened child with care? Followed Holt's orders without question and let the machine process the boy through its gears? But every time I ran through the alternatives, I hit the same wall. There was no version of me that would have walked away from that kid. Not when he looked at me like I was his last hope. Not when every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. My defense officer, a lieutenant commander from JAG who looked too young for his rank, advised silence. "They're setting you up as an example, Blake. Holt wants to make a statement about discipline and chain of command. If you argue, you just give them more ammunition. So I'm supposed to sit here quietly while they end my career?" I'm saying pick your battles. This one's already lost. Maybe he was right. Holt was moving fast, filing reports, pushing for discharge under gross negligence, building a case that made me look like a reckless officer who'd put her feelings above the safety of the ship. My record, spotless until 3 days ago, was now being reframed as evidence of someone who'd been waiting to crack under pressure. The crew's silence hurt more than I'd expected. These were people I'd worked alongside for months, people whose lives depended on me getting maintenance right, people I'd fought for when they needed time off or equipment upgrades or just someone to listen. Now they walked past my hatch like I was already dead. Only Chief Morales broke the silence. He appeared on the second night, somehow talking his way past the guard, carrying a covered meal tray. Figured you could use real food instead of whatever they've been sliding through the slot, ma'am. You shouldn't be here, Chief. Association with me won't help your career. He set the tray down with a shrug. Been in 20 years, ma'am. My career's as high as it's getting. Besides, some things matter more than rank. The boy, do you know what happened to him? Shore Patrol took him to base security. Beyond that, he shook his head. Nobody's talking. Holt's got this locked down tight. After he left, I ate the meal slowly, savoring the small act of kindness in a world that had gone cold. Then I sat down and wrote my resignation letter. Not because I was guilty, I wasn't. Not because I'd been wrong, I hadn't been. But because I couldn't stand the bureaucracy pretending humanity was weakness, couldn't stomach the idea of serving under commanders like Holt who valued compliance over conscience. The letter sat on my desk and signed for hours. I stared at it, at the words that would end everything I'd worked for, everything my father had inspired me to build. 8 years of service, reduced to a single paragraph explaining that I was voluntarily separating from the Navy effective immediately. My hand hovered over the pen. This was it. The final choice. Sign and walk away on my terms, or wait for them to push me out on theirs. On the third night, just after 2,200 hours, the guard slid my dinner through the hatch, standard issue, cold and unappetizing. But he lingered at the door, which wasn't protocol. Ma'am, he said quietly. There's someone asking for you on deck. I looked up. What do you mean? Can't say more. Just thought you should know. He left before I could ask questions. I didn't think much of it. Probably another reprimand, another officer coming to document my psychological state for the official record. Maybe even Holt, making one last visit to watch me sign away my career. I went back to the resignation letter, picked up the pen, started to sign and stopped. Something about the guard's tone bothered me. Someone asking for you wasn't how you'd describe official business. It was how you'd describe something unexpected. I left the letter and signed and tried to sleep. It didn't come easily. The ship's rhythm, normally soothing, the gentle rock and mechanical hum that had become my lullaby, felt ominous now, like the whole vessel was holding its breath. At 0600 hours, they came for me. Morning came with the sound of boots on steel. Heavy, multiple sets, moving with purpose. The hatch opened before I was fully awake. Holt stood there, clipboard in hand, his expression unreadable. You're being released for formal review, he said. No greeting, no preamble. Admiralty wants to handle this one personally. That should have terrified me. When flag officers got involved in disciplinary cases, it usually meant they were about to make an example that would echo through every wardroom in the fleet. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like the decision was already made and I was just waiting to learn what it was. Understood, sir. Get yourself presentable. You have 15 minutes. He left. I changed quickly into my dress uniform, the one I'd been married to the Navy in, metaphorically speaking. If I was going down, I'd go down looking like I'd meant every day of service. When I stepped out of my quarters, the passageway was empty. Too empty. Normally this time of morning, the ship was alive with activity, crew moving to posts, morning routines unfolding with practiced efficiency. Now there was just silence and the absence of people who should have been there. The guard escorted me topside. As we emerged onto the hangar deck, I saw why the ship felt empty. Everyone was there. Hundreds of crew members, standing at parade rest, watching. Waiting. Chief Morales caught my eye. Gave the slightest nod. The hangar was spotless, configured for inspection. Someone had gone to enormous trouble to make this space look perfect, which meant this was about to be very public, very official, and very career-ending. Holt stood at the far end, surrounded by other officers. The captain was there, Commander Reeves, a man I'd barely spoken to in 8 months. My CO, who'd signed off on Holt's investigation without question. He looked uncomfortable now, which was interesting. Then I heard it. The sound of engines. Not aircraft, ground vehicles. On a carrier at sea, which made no sense until I remembered we were currently pierside for maintenance. A black SUV rolled up the access ramp, its presence so unusual that the entire assembled crew shifted, murmuring. Security scattered. Holt straightened his posture, confusion breaking through his usual controlled facade. What the hell, he started, then caught himself. Who authorized vehicle access to? The doors opened. For stars caught the morning light. Shoulder boards that represented the highest levels of naval authority, worn by a man who stepped out like he already knew exactly who he was looking for. Admiral John Keane, Commander of Naval Operations. Oh, 10. The kind of rank that makes full-bird colonels nervous and commanders like Holt question every decision they've ever made. Where is Officer Blake? His voice carried across the silent hangar without being raised. Holt's voice actually cracked. Sir, she's under review for not anymore. Keane's eyes found mine across the space. She's the reason my son's alive. The hangar went dead silent. Even the ambient noise of the ship seemed to pause. My pulse was the only sound I heard, pounding in my ears so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. The Admiral walked toward me. Every crew member he passed stood a little straighter. Holt looked like he'd swallowed glass. Keane stopped 3 feet in front of me. I saluted. He returned it, then extended his hand. Lieutenant Blake, I owe you an explanation and a debt I can never properly repay. I shook his hand, my voice steadier than I felt. Sir, I don't understand. My son, Ethan. 7 years old. He wandered from a VIP tour 3 days ago while I was inspecting carrier readiness. By the time we realized he was missing, your deck had been locked down for flight operations. We searched everywhere except where a child might actually hide when he's terrified. Behind him, Holt had gone pale. Keane continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the hangar. Lieutenant Blake found him in one of the most dangerous areas of this ship. She could have simply called it in and moved on. Instead, she assessed the situation, recognized a child in crisis, and took action to ensure his safety until the circumstances could be properly understood. Her violation of protocol saved my son's life. If maintenance had started fuel purging that night, or if he'd wandered further into the hangar. He didn't finish. Didn't need to. The Admiral produced a folder from his aide. Opened it. Started reading aloud from what I recognized as Holt's report. Lieutenant Blake demonstrated willful disregard for security protocols, exhibited emotional decision-making inappropriate for her rank, and endangered vessel operations by concealing a security breach. Keane looked up. Commander Holt, did you write this? Holt's jaw worked. Yes, sir. Did you at any point attempt to determine why Lieutenant Blake acted as she did? Did you investigate the circumstances surrounding the child's presence? Did you consider that your own security sweep had failed to locate a 7-year-old boy in a supposedly secured area? Sir, protocol requires judgment, Commander. It requires officers to assess situations and act accordingly. Lieutenant Blake found a terrified child in a dangerous location. She kept him safe while attempting to understand circumstances that your report completely fails to address. He turned back to me. You fed him. Kept him warm. Tried to communicate with him. That's not emotional weakness. That's leadership. I didn't know what to say. Couldn't have spoken if I'd wanted to, my throat was too tight. Keane handed the folder to his aide. I'm requesting Lieutenant Blake's immediate reinstatement to full duty status. Furthermore, I'm recommending her for commendation for decisive judgment under crisis conditions. He looked at Holt. As for this investigation, it's closed. Effective immediately. Holt's color had gone from pale to deep red. Sir, with respect, the chain of command will be reviewed, Commander. Starting with why your security sweep missed a child, why you assumed protocol violation before investigating circumstances, and why you moved to destroy an officer's career instead of learning from a situation that revealed significant operational gaps. Keen's voice never rose, but the temperature in the hangar seemed to drop. You're dismissed. Holt saluted stiffly and walked away. Every eye in the hangar watched him go. I felt something shift in that moment, not satisfaction, not vindication, just the quiet recognition that justice sometimes actually happens, even in systems designed to grind individuals down. Commander Reeves approached, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 5 minutes. Lieutenant Blake, I owe you an apology. I should have pushed back harder on the investigation. Should have asked more questions. Sir, no. He held up a hand. I was wrong. I let Holt's reputation and my own caution override my judgment. That's on me. The Admiral spoke to me privately while the crew was dismissed. My son told us what happened. He'd gotten separated during the tour, panicked, and hid when he heard footsteps. By the time your team locked down the hangar, he was too scared to call out. He said you were the first person who made him feel safe. How is he, sir? Physically fine. Emotionally? Keen's expression softened. He's 7. He'll be okay. Better than okay, because someone cared enough to help him when it mattered. He paused. I understand you were planning to resign. I nodded. I was, sir. Before you arrived. And now? I thought about that. About my father's lessons, about 8 years of service, about what it meant to wear the uniform in a way that honored both the structure and the humanity underneath it. Now I'd like to finish what I started, sir. If the Navy will have me. Keen smiled. Lieutenant, the Navy needs more officers like you. People who remember that all our protocols and procedures exist to serve a larger purpose, protecting lives and upholding values. When those two things conflict, you chose right. He left the same way he'd arrived, purposefully, leaving changed circumstances in his wake. I stood on the deck I'd thought I'd never see again, surrounded by crew members who were suddenly willing to make eye contact, and felt the weight of the last 3 days begin to lift. Chief Morales approached, grinning. Hell of a morning, ma'am. That's one way to put it, Chief. For what it's worth, I never doubted you did the right thing. Thank you. I meant it more than he'd probably ever know. The hangar slowly returned to normal operations. Jets were moved, maintenance schedules resumed. The carrier's heart began beating its regular rhythm again. But something fundamental had shifted. I could feel it in the way people looked at me, not with suspicion or pity, but with something closer to respect. That evening, alone in my quarters with my belongings restored and my clearance reactivated, I took out the unsigned resignation letter. Read it one more time. Then I tore it into small pieces and dropped them in the waste bin. The Navy hadn't broken me. It had tested me, found me genuine, and given me a second chance. Not everyone gets that. I wouldn't waste it. The crew was cautious around me at first. Even with the Admiral's intervention and Holt's reassignment, I could feel them measuring their distance. When you stand up to command, even for the right reasons, people don't know which side you're on anymore. Are you one of them, or are you someone who'll throw the rulebook away when it suits you? I understood their hesitation. Trust in military culture isn't given, it's earned through consistency and time. So I focused on what I could control, my work. I showed up early, stayed late, and ran maintenance operations with the same precision I'd always demanded. No drama, no speeches about what had happened. Just competence and reliability, day after day. Slowly, the walls came down. Chief Morales was first, naturally, but others followed. Lieutenant Harper actually apologized, which I hadn't expected. I should have visited you during confinement, she said over coffee in the wardroom. I was scared of Holt, scared of being associated with you. That was cowardly. You were being practical. I don't blame you for that. Maybe, but practical isn't always right. You taught me that. 2 weeks after the Admiral's visit, a package arrived in my mail. No return address, but I recognized the official seal. It had come through naval channels. Inside was a photograph. Ethan, wearing a miniature Navy hat that was too big for him, saluting the camera with serious 7-year-old determination. No note, no explanation. Just him, smiling, alive. I put the photo in my locker and looked at it every morning before duty. A reminder of why all the protocols and procedures existed, to protect people like him. But also a reminder that systems without humanity become prisons, and rules without judgment become tyranny. Commander Reeves called me to his office a month after my reinstatement. I expected routine business, maintenance schedules, equipment requisitions, the normal administrative work of running a carrier's aircraft operations. Instead, he gestured to a chair and closed the door. "Blake, I wanted to speak with you privately. The Admiral's commendation is moving through channels. It'll be official within 6 weeks. But there's something else." He paused. "I owe you a real apology, not just the public one I gave on the hangar deck." "Sir, you don't, I do. I let Holt run this deck without oversight because his numbers were good. Flight operations ran smoothly, maintenance stayed on schedule, and I didn't ask hard questions about how he was achieving those results. That was leadership failure on my part. I didn't disagree, so I stayed silent. You did something I should have done. You prioritized correctly when procedure and human need collided. I won't forget that. And I want you to know that you have my support moving forward. Whatever you need to do your job effectively." "Thank you, sir. That means a lot." One more thing. The investigation into how Ethan ended up on the deck revealed significant security gaps. Holt's team had been cutting corners on safety sweeps to speed up operations. The Admiral wants a full review of our procedures. I'm putting you in charge of it. That surprised me. "Sir, I'm maintenance, not security. You're an officer who proved she can see beyond checklists to actual risk. That's exactly what this review needs. Will you do it?" I thought about my father, about his 28 years of service, about all the times he'd probably been asked to do things that stretched beyond his official role because someone trusted his judgment. "Yes, sir. I'll do it." The review took 3 months. I worked with security, operations, and deck crews to map every vulnerability in our lockdown procedures. We discovered that Holt's push for efficiency had created dozens of small gaps, individually minor, collectively dangerous. The kind of thing that goes unnoticed until a 7-year-old boy slips through them. My recommendations weren't popular. They added time to operations, required more personnel for sweeps, and complicated the streamlined efficiency Holt had built. But Commander Reeves backed every one of them, and eventually they became new standard procedure across the carrier fleet. Admiral Keane sent a personal note when the new protocols were published. "You've improved safety for every sailor in the Navy. This is the work that matters, not just responding to crisis, but preventing the next one. Well done, Lieutenant." I kept that note in my locker next to Ethan's photo. The commendation ceremony happened on a Tuesday morning. The entire ship's company assembled. Commander Reeves read the citation, "For exceptional judgment and decisive action in ensuring the safety of a minor during critical flight operations, demonstrating the highest standards of naval service and leadership." The medal was nice. But what mattered more was Chief Morales's handshake afterward, Lieutenant Harper's quiet, "proud of you," and the dozens of crew members who made a point of congratulating me. Not because I'd gotten recognition, because I'd proven something they needed to believe, that doing right sometimes actually works out. That night, I wrote my father a letter I'd never send. He'd been gone 3 years, but writing it helped clarify my thoughts. "You taught me structure and conscience, Dad. The Navy tested whether I learned both lessons. I think I did. I think you'd be proud. Not because I got a medal, but because I stayed human inside the uniform. That's what you wanted for me all along, wasn't it? To serve with honor, but never to let the system make me forget why service matters in the first place." I folded the letter and tucked it away, knowing I'd never need to read it again. The lessons were bone deep now. The Navy hadn't broken me. It had revealed me, shown me what I was made of when everything was on the line. And I'd learned something crucial. Authority and honor aren't the same thing. You can have one without the other. The best officers have both. I was determined to be one of them. A year later, I stood on deck again, watching jets arc into the horizon. The same carrier, the same ocean, but everything felt different. New collar insignia marked my promotion to Lieutenant Commander 04. Same deck where I'd almost lost everything, now wearing rank that said the Navy believed in me enough to give me more responsibility. Holt's replacement, Commander Sarah Chin, was everything he wasn't: collaborative, thoughtful, willing to admit when she didn't know something. She'd asked me within her first week, "Tell me honestly, Blake, what do I need to know about running this deck that won't be in the handover reports?" I respected her for asking. Chin had called me to her office a month into her tenure with an unusual request. The Admiral, Keen, has been pushing for better crisis training across the fleet. He wants officers who can think beyond protocol when circumstances require it. He specifically mentioned your name as someone who could develop curriculum. "Ma'am, I'm not an instructor. You're someone who lived through a situation where protocol failed and judgment succeeded. That's exactly what we need to teach." She slid a folder across her desk. "I'm recommending you lead a new training program, Protocol Flexibility During Humanitarian Risk. Fancy title for How to Make Good Decisions When the Rulebook Doesn't Have Answers." I opened the folder. Inside were training objectives, class structures, and a note from Admiral Keen: "The same act that nearly ended your career is now a case study in leadership." Funny how that works. JK, I looked up at Chen. "When do we start?" The first class was awkward. 30 junior officers, most around 02 or 03, sitting in a conference room looking skeptical. They knew the story. Everyone in the fleet knew the story by now, embellished through countless retellings. I could see the question in their eyes. Was this going to be some feel-good sermon about following your heart? I kept it simple. The rulebook exists for good reasons. It's built from decades of experience, mistakes, and lessons learned in blood. You should never treat it lightly. But I paused. Sometimes, the rulebook can't see what's right in front of you. You can. And in those moments, your judgment matters more than your checklist. A young lieutenant raised his hand. How do you know when it's one of those moments? Honestly, you don't. Not with certainty. But you can ask yourself questions. Am I making this decision based on fear of consequences or genuine assessment of the situation? Am I ignoring my instincts because they're inconvenient or because they're actually wrong? Is following procedure in this case going to achieve the outcome the procedure was designed for? Another officer spoke up. What if you're wrong? What if you break protocol and it turns out badly? Then you own it. You accept the consequences. That's part of the decision, weighing the risk to yourself against the risk to others. I got lucky. The Admiral showed up and I was vindicated. But I went into that situation knowing I'd probably lose my career. I made peace with that cost. The room went quiet. These were people who'd worked hard for their rank, who'd sacrificed for their careers. Asking them to risk all of that wasn't simple. "Look," I said, "I'm not telling you to ignore the rules whenever they're inconvenient. I'm telling you to understand why they exist, so when you encounter a situation where following them blindly would cause more harm than good, you have the judgment to choose differently. And the courage to live with your choice." The training program ran for 6 weeks. We studied case studies, ran tabletop exercises, debated ethical dilemmas. Some officers got it immediately. Others struggled with the ambiguity. They wanted clear answers, definitive guidance. I couldn't give them that. Leadership isn't paint by numbers, I told them on the last day. If it were, we wouldn't need leaders. We just need managers following instructions. The Navy has plenty of those. What we need are officers who can think. One of the students, an ensign fresh from the academy, approached me after the final session. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Do you ever regret it? Even though it worked out, do you ever wish you'd just followed orders?" I thought about that boy's face. About his small hand gripping my sleeve. About the photo in my locker of him saluting in an oversized Navy hat. "No," I said. "Not even once." The training program became permanent. Chin told me it was being adapted for use at other commands, other carriers. My little crisis had become institutional knowledge, which felt surreal. But more important than the formal program were the informal conversations. Junior officers started coming to me with ethical questions, situations where they weren't sure what the right choice was. I didn't always have answers, but I listened. And sometimes, just talking through a problem with someone who'd been there helped them find their own way forward. Chief Morales retired that year. At his ceremony, he pulled me aside. "You know what you did, ma'am? You reminded us why we signed up. Not for the rules or the procedures, for each other. For the people we're supposed to protect. Don't lose that. I won't, Chief. I know. That's why you'll make a fine commander someday. Hell, maybe even admiral. I laughed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Mark my words, ma'am. The Navy needs more officers like you. They're starting to figure that out. Every time I walked past Hangar Bay 2, I still heard that small voice, "Don't tell anyone I'm here." And I remembered what it felt like to choose between following orders and following conscience. The Navy had taught me precision. That boy had taught me compassion. Together, they'd taught me leadership. Sometimes breaking protocol isn't failure. It's faith in what's still human inside the uniform. Faith that judgment, carefully cultivated and honestly applied, can be trusted when checklists fall short. That's what I carried into every decision I made afterward. Not recklessness, not defiance, just the quiet certainty that rules serve people, not the other way around. And when you understand that distinction deeply enough, you can serve with both discipline and humanity. Admiral Keene visited the carrier one more time before I transferred to my next assignment. We spoke privately on the flight deck, watching the sun set over an endless ocean. "My son asks about you sometimes," he said. "Wants to know if the nice officer is still on the ship." "How is he?" "Good. Happy. He wants to join the Navy when he grows up. Says he wants to help people like you helped him." That's a lot of pressure to put on a 7-year-old's memory. Keene smiled. 8 now. And it's not pressure, it's inspiration. You showed him what service looks like at its best. That matters. We stood there in comfortable silence, two officers at very different points in their careers, connected by a moment when everything could have gone wrong and somehow went right instead. "Thank you, Lieutenant Commander," Keene said finally. "Not just for Ethan. For reminding us what we're supposed to be." He left. I stayed on deck until the sun fully set, until the stars came out sharp and clear above the black water. Then I went below, past the hangar where it all started, past the tool room where a scared boy had hidden, past all the places that would always remind me of the night I chose conscience over career. My quarters felt different now. Not just because of the new rank insignia on my uniforms or the commendation on my wall, but because I knew who I was in a way I hadn't before. The Navy hadn't broken me. It had revealed me. And in that revelation, I'd found something worth keeping, the kind of integrity my father had always hoped I'd develop. Not blind obedience, not reckless individualism, but the hard-won wisdom to know when rules serve their purpose and when they need someone brave enough to step beyond them. That wisdom was my legacy now. The thing I'd pass on to every junior officer I mentored, every crew member I led. Structure and conscience, discipline and humanity, held in careful balance. Some lessons you learn in classrooms. Others you learn by risking everything for what you know is right, then living with whatever comes next. I'd learned mine in a hangar bay, from a terrified child who trusted me when he had no reason to, and I'd carry him, with me for the rest of my career. Sometimes, breaking protocol isn't failure. It's the moment you finally understand what the uniform really means. 10 years changes everything and nothing. The ocean looks the same, endless, indifferent, wearing away at steel and resolve with patient consistency. But the woman standing on the bridge of the USS Constellation wasn't the same lieutenant who'd hidden a scared boy in a tool room a decade ago. Commander Sarah Blake. 05. Executive officer of a Nimitz-class carrier with 4,000 souls under her watch. The second highest ranking officer on one of the most powerful vessels in the United States Navy. I still had moments where I touched the rank insignia on my collar and wondered how I'd gotten here. The answer, of course, was the same way everyone gets anywhere in the Navy, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one test of character at a time. Some tests you pass, some you fail. The important thing is what you learn from both. The morning started like most others at sea. 0500 hours, standing watch on the bridge as the sun crept over the horizon, painting the Pacific in shades of orange and gold that never got old no matter how many times you saw them. The officer of the deck was giving the night report, routine operations, no incidents, all systems nominal. "Ma'am, you have a visitor scheduled at 0700, my aide," Lieutenant Foster said quietly. "Admiral Keene and guest." I looked up from the readiness report I'd been reviewing. The Admiral's coming aboard today? That wasn't on yesterday's schedule. Came through late last night, ma'am. Priority routing. He requested to see you specifically. That was unusual. Admiral Keene, now a full 4-star admiral and commander of Pacific Fleet, didn't make surprise visits to carriers for social calls. And he certainly didn't request specific officers unless it was official business. Did his office say what this is about? Negative, ma'am. Just that he'd be arriving by a helicopter at 0700 with one guest, and he'd like to speak with you privately. I nodded. Very well. Let me know when he's 10 minutes out. The rest of the morning watch passed in the routine rhythm of carrier operations. Aircraft launches at 0600, the catapults throwing F divided by a -18s into the sky with controlled violence that still thrilled me after all these years. Below deck, 4,000 people were waking up, starting their day, keeping this floating city running with the kind of precision that looked effortless, but required constant attention. At 0650, Foster found me inspecting the flight deck operations. Admirals inbound, ma'am. 5 minutes. I made my way to the island superstructure, checking my uniform one last time. Even after 10 years, meeting with a 4-star admiral triggered that automatic response, making sure everything was exactly right, showing the respect the rank deserved. The SH-60 Seahawk touched down at precisely 0700. Perfect timing, as always. The door opened and Admiral Keene stepped out, followed by someone else. Someone smaller, wearing civilian clothes, but moving with military bearing. My breath caught. It couldn't be. But it was. Ethan Keene wasn't 7 anymore. He was 17, tall and lean, looking so much like his father it was startling. Same jawline, same serious eyes. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, and when he saw me standing at attention, he broke into a grin that transformed his whole face. Admiral Keene approached first, returning my salute. Commander Blake. Thank you for making time on short notice. Of course, sir. It's an honor. I looked at Ethan, hardly believing what I was seeing. And Mr. Keene. You've grown a bit since I last saw you. Ethan laughed, clearly nervous. Yes, ma'am. Quite a bit. The Admiral gestured toward the island. Is there somewhere we could speak privately? This is somewhat personal. I led them to my office, a small space compared to the captain's quarters, but mine, with a window overlooking the flight deck and photos on the wall that told the story of my career. Admiral Keene studied them while I closed the door. That's from the Humanitarian Crisis Training Program, he said, pointing to a photo of me with a class of junior officers. How many graduates now? Just over 2,000, sir, across all commands. Impressive. He turned to face me fully. Commander, you remember my son, of course. I do, sir. Though he was considerably shorter last time we met. Ethan's grin widened. I remember you too, ma'am. More than my dad probably thinks I do. I remember how you wrapped your jacket around me. How you gave me crackers and told me I was safe. I remember your voice in the dark. Something in my chest tightened. You were very brave, Ethan. I was terrified. But you made it okay. He glanced at his father, took a breath like he was steadying himself. Ma'am, the reason we're here, I'm applying to the Naval Academy. My application's due in 6 weeks. And I was hoping you might write me a letter of recommendation. I looked at Admiral Keene, surprised. Sir, surely he has plenty of officers who could. He does, the Admiral interrupted gently. He has recommendations from his ROTC instructors, from me, from 3 other flag officers who've known him his whole life. But he insisted on asking you. Said it wouldn't mean the same without it. Ethan stepped forward, his nervousness showing through his military bearing. That night changed my life, ma'am. Not just because you kept me safe, though that's important, but because of what you showed me about what service means. My dad told me later what happened. How you were confined, how you almost lost your career because you helped me. How you did it anyway because it was right. Your father made sure justice was done, I said. Without him, without you, I wouldn't be here, Ethan said firmly. I know the whole story now, ma'am. How Commander Holt wanted to destroy you. How you were going to resign rather than compromise what you believed in. That's the kind of officer I want to be. That's why I want to serve. You inspired that. I had to sit down. The weight of his words, The sudden realization that a choice I'd made a decade ago, a choice that had felt desperate and uncertain at the time, had shaped this young man's entire future, was overwhelming. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll write the letter," he said simply. "Please." I looked at Admiral Keene. He was watching his son with obvious pride, but also something else. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition that some debts can never be fully repaid, but the attempt still matters. "Of course I will," I said. "I'd be honored." Ethan's relief was visible. "Thank you, ma'am. That means everything." Admiral Keene cleared his throat. "There's one more thing, Commander. The reason I wanted to be here for this conversation." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and set it on my desk. "You're being promoted to captain." "Oh, 6. The board met last week. Results are embargoed for another 72 hours, but I wanted to tell you personally before the official announcement." The room tilted slightly. "Captain." Full bird. The rank I'd dreamed about as a lieutenant, but never quite believed I'd achieve. The rank that put you in command of major vessels, that marked you as senior leadership in the Navy's structure. "Sir, you've earned it, Blake." Multiple commendations, flawless service record, the training program that's become fleet-wide standard. But more than that, you've proven something important, that integrity and advancement aren't mutually exclusive. That doing right doesn't mean sacrificing your career, it means building one worth having. He paused. "You'll take command of the USS Vigilant in 6 months. The Vigilant. The carrier where it had all started. Where I'd been Lieutenant Blake, aircraft maintenance officer, hiding a scared boy from Commander Holt's rigid authority. Where I'd nearly lost everything and somehow found myself instead. That feels like coming full circle, sir." "It is. Intentionally. The Navy has a sense of poetry sometimes." He smiled. "Your crew deserves a captain who understands that rules serve people, not the other way around. You proved you understand that better than most." We talked for another hour. Ethan asked about life aboard a carrier, about what the academy would be like, about how to balance the demands of military service with staying human inside the uniform. I answered as honestly as I could, trying to give him the kind of guidance I'd wished for at his age. Admiral Keene shared stories I'd never heard, how the investigation into that night had revealed systemic problems with Holt's command, how my case had sparked a broader conversation in the Navy about when to follow protocol and when to question it, how the training program I developed had influenced doctrine at the highest levels. "You changed the institution, Blake," he said. "Not just through that one act, but through everything that followed. That's rare. Most of us serve honorably, but don't fundamentally alter how the Navy thinks. You did." After they left, I stood in my office for a long time, looking at the photos on the wall. My father in his Chief Petty Officer uniform, taken a year before he died. My commissioning ceremony, looking impossibly young and certain. The photo of me receiving the commendation from Admiral Keene, Ethan's small face visible in the crowd. And newer ones leading the training program, my promotion to 04, then 05, a steady progression of a career built on foundation that had nearly crumbled but held. Lieutenant Foster knocked softly. "Ma'am? Everything all right?" "Yes." I turned to face her. "Everything's very all right. Get me the personnel files on lieutenant junior grade candidates for aide positions. I'll need a new one when I transfer to the Vigilant." "Transfer, ma'am?" I smiled. "The announcement isn't official yet, so keep this quiet. But start preparing for a change of command ceremony in 6 months." Her eyes widened. "You're getting a ship, ma'am?" "I'm getting the Vigilant." She grinned. "That's outstanding, ma'am. Congratulations." After she left, I wrote Ethan's letter of recommendation. It took 3 hours and multiple drafts. I wanted to get it right, to capture not just his qualifications, but who he was, what that night had revealed about his character even at 7 years old, and what I believed he would become. Ethan Keene demonstrated extraordinary composure and resilience under circumstances that would terrify most adults, I wrote. More importantly, in the years since, he has transformed that experience into purpose. He seeks to serve not from abstract patriotism, but from genuine understanding that service means protecting others when they're most vulnerable. The Naval Academy would be fortunate to develop this young man's potential. The Navy would be fortunate to count him among its officers. I sent it that evening, then walked the ship. It was something I did regularly, moving through the different spaces, seeing how the crew was doing, being visible and available. The captain did his own version, but as XO, I had different relationships with the crew. They felt more comfortable approaching me with problems, questions, concerns they weren't ready to take to the old man. Chief Ramirez, the senior enlisted advisor, fell into step beside me as I passed through the hangar deck. "Evening, ma'am. How'd the Admiral's visit go?" "Interesting. His son is applying to the academy." "The kid from that night? On the Vigilant?" "The same. He's 17 now. Tall, confident. Wants to be a naval officer." Ramirez chuckled. "Because of you, from what I heard." "That's what he said." "Still trying to process that." "You should be proud, ma'am. You changed that kid's life. Probably changed a lot of lives with how you handled things." We walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ramirez spoke again, more carefully. "Words going around, ma'am, about you maybe getting your own command soon." I glanced at him. Enlisted networks were faster than official communications. Always had been. "Can't confirm rumors, Chief." "Of course not, ma'am. But hypothetically, if you were getting a command, and if you needed a good command master chief, I'd be honored to put my name forward." I stopped walking and looked at him directly. "You'd follow me to a new ship?" "Ma'am, you're the kind of CO worth following. You give a damn about your people. You make hard calls when they need making. And you remember that all these ranks and rules exist to serve something bigger." He met my eyes. "The crew knows that about you. A lot of us would follow you wherever you're going." "I appreciate that, Chief. More than you know." That night, alone in my quarters, I thought about paths and choices and consequences. 10 years ago, I'd been a lieutenant facing the end of my career, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Now I was about to become a captain, commanding the same ship where it had all nearly fallen apart. The Navy I'd joined at 23 had been all about rules and structure, precision and hierarchy. The Navy I was part of now, the one I was helping shape, understood that those things mattered but weren't sufficient. That leadership required judgment, that service required conscience, and that the best officers were the ones who could balance both. My father would have understood. He'd tried to teach me that balance, walking that line between being a chief petty officer who upheld every regulation and being the man who'd occasionally bent rules when lives or welfare were on the line. He'd never made captain, enlisted personnel couldn't in his era, but he'd embodied the kind of leadership that transcended rank. I wrote him a letter, like I did sometimes when I needed to clarify my thoughts. He'd been gone 13 years now, but the practice helped me think. "Dad, I'm going to be a captain." "Oh, 6. Commanding the Vigilant where it all started. Remember when you said the Navy would either break me or reveal me? You were right about the revealing part. Turns out I'm exactly the officer you hoped I'd be, someone who respects the structure but remembers there are people inside it. Someone who can follow orders but knows when to question them. Someone who wears the uniform with honor but never forgets what's human underneath. That boy I helped, he's going to the academy now. Wants to serve because of what I showed him that night. I don't know if I deserve that kind of influence, but I'll try to live up to it. The same way I've tried to live up to what you taught me. I wish you were here to see this. But I think you'd be proud. Not because of the rank, you never cared much about rank, but because of how I got here. The hard way. The right way. Your way. Thanks for the lessons, Dad. All of them." I folded the letter and put it in the box where I kept the others. 37 letters over 13 years, a one-sided conversation with a man who'd shaped everything I'd become. The next 6 months passed in preparation. Transitioning out of my role as XO, preparing for command, completing the mandatory schools and certifications. The official announcement came 3 days after Admiral Keene's visit, and my inbox exploded with congratulations from officers I'd served with over the years. Commander Chin, who'd replaced Holt on the Vigilant and was now a captain herself, sent a personal note. "They're giving you the ship you saved your career on." Poetic justice at its finest. "She's in good hands, Blake. Make us proud." Lieutenant Harper, now a lieutenant commander on her own command track, called personally. "You did it. You actually did it." I still remember telling you that standing up to Holt would end your career. Thank God I was wrong. You weren't wrong about the risk. You were just wrong about how it would resolve. Same difference. Point is, you're going to be an amazing captain. The Vigilant's lucky to have you. The crew of the Constellation threw me an unofficial farewell gathering, against regulations, technically, but the kind of rule-bending that I'd learned to appreciate. They presented me with a plaque engraved with the ship's crest and the words, "To Commander Blake, who taught us that leadership means courage. Fair winds and following seas." Captain Morrison, the Constellation CO, shook my hand privately before I departed. "You've been the best XO I could have asked for, Blake. The Vigilant's getting a captain who knows her business and gives a damn about her crew. That's rarer than you'd think." "Thank you, sir. I learned a lot serving under you. You'll do fine. Just remember, command is lonely sometimes. You won't have another XO to bounce ideas off. The responsibility lands on you alone. But you've got good instincts. Trust them." I arrived at Naval Station San Diego on a Wednesday morning, 3 days before the change of command ceremony. The Vigilant was pier-side, her massive bulk somehow both imposing and familiar. I'd served aboard her for 2 years as a lieutenant, walked these decks, learned these spaces, nearly lost everything in her shadow. Now she was mine. I walked aboard alone that first day, no fanfare, no escort. Just me and the ship, getting reacquainted. The hangar deck looked the same but different, new paint, updated equipment, but fundamentally unchanged. I stood in the spot where Admiral Keene had arrived in his black SUV, where Holt had gone pale, where my career had been resurrected in front of 4,000 witnesses. "Can I help you, ma'am?" A young sailor approached, probably wondering why a captain was standing alone on the hangar deck at 0700. "No, thank you. Just remembering something." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "Are you the new CO?" "I am. Captain Blake." His face lit up. "Oh, ma'am, everyone's been talking about you coming back. About what happened here years ago. That's legendary." I smiled. Legendary is a strong word. I made a choice that worked out. That's all. Still, ma'am, it's cool that you're taking command here. Feels right, you know. After he left, I found the tool room where I'd hidden Ethan. It looked exactly the same, cramped, smelling of grease and solvents, every tool in its designated place. I stood in the doorway and remembered a scared 7-year-old clinging to my sleeve, his silence heavy with things I hadn't understood then but recognized now. "You did good, Lieutenant Blake," I said quietly to my younger self. "Better than you knew." The change of command ceremony was held on the flight deck on a Saturday morning. Hundreds of crew members in dress whites, dozens of officers from other commands, and a reviewing party that included Admiral Keene and, surprisingly, Ethan. The outgoing CO, Captain Richardson, gave a gracious speech about the Vigilant's readiness and the crew's professionalism. Then it was my turn. I looked out at the assembled crew, at their young faces and their old ones, at the petty officers and chiefs who'd keep the ship running regardless of who was in command, at the junior officers who reminded me of who I'd been a decade ago. 10 years ago, I stood on this deck as a lieutenant, I began. I made a choice that day that could have ended my career. Instead, it taught me what leadership really means. It's not about blind obedience to rules. It's not about doing whatever feels right without regard for consequence. It's about judgment, developed through experience, guided by conscience, tempered by humility. I return to the ship as your captain, humbled by the trust placed in me, mindful of the responsibility that comes with command. We will run a tight ship. We will maintain the highest standards of readiness and professionalism. But we will never forget that all our protocols and procedures exist to serve a higher purpose, protecting lives and upholding the values that make service meaningful. To the crew of the Vigilant, I promise you fairness, honesty, and leadership that remembers your human beings, not just numbers on a roster. In return, I expect your best work, your integrity, and your commitment to this ship and to each other. Together, we'll make the Vigilant the finest carrier in the fleet. The ceremony concluded with the traditional passing of the command pennant. As I accepted it, as the crew saluted and I felt the full weight of command settle onto my shoulders, I caught Admiral Keene's eye. He nodded once, approval and satisfaction clear in his expression. Ethan stood beside his father in civilian clothes, watching with an intensity that reminded me of that night 10 years ago, the same serious eyes, the same focus, but confident now instead of terrified. After the ceremony, after the receiving line and the official photographs and the mandatory pleasantries, Ethan approached me privately. "Congratulations, Captain Blake." "Thank you, Ethan. And thank you for being here. It means a lot. I wouldn't have missed it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I got my acceptance letter from the academy yesterday. I start in 6 weeks." Pure joy surged through me. "Ethan, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Your letter made the difference, I think. At least, that's what my interview officer said. He told me I had the strongest recommendation he'd seen in years." His voice caught slightly. "You changed my life twice now, ma'am. Once by saving it, once by helping me start the one I want." I reached out and gripped his shoulder. "You did that yourself, Ethan. I just wrote down what was already true. You're going to be an outstanding officer. I'll try to be the kind you taught me to be." Admiral Keene joined us, his hand extended. "Captain Blake. Seems we've come full circle." "It does, sir. Thank you for being here. Wouldn't have missed it. Besides, I wanted to see the look on your face when you realized who your new chief of the boat is." I blinked. "Sir, didn't you check your senior enlisted roster?" His smile widened. "Master Chief Petty Officer Morales. He requested transfer to the Vigilance specifically to serve under your command." I approved it personally. My chest tightened. Morales had been a chief when I was a lieutenant, one of the few people who'd quietly supported me during the incident with Ethan. Now he was Command Master Chief, the highest enlisted rank on the ship, my right hand in leading the crew. I didn't know. When does he report?" "He's already aboard. Waiting to brief you on crew readiness when you're ready." I found Morales an hour later in his office, a small space near the hangar deck, decorated with photos from his 28 years of service. He stood when I entered, came to attention. "At ease, Master Chief. I understand congratulations are in order for both of us." He grinned. "Yes, ma'am. Seemed like the right ship to finish my career on." "Finish? You thinking about retirement?" "In a few years. But I wanted to serve under a CO who remembered what we're really here for. Figured you'd be that kind of captain." We spent 2 hours going over the crew, their strengths, their problems, the personalities I'd need to understand, the issues that required attention. Morales knew his people the way only a Master Chief could, with the institutional knowledge that made the Navy actually function beneath all its official hierarchies. "We've got a good crew, ma'am," he concluded. "They're ready for a CO who'll push them hard but treat them fair. Word's already spreading about who you are, what you did. They're excited. That's rare. I just hope I can live up to their expectations." "You will, ma'am. I've known you 10 years now. You're the same officer you were then, just with more experience and better judgment. That's exactly what this ship needs." That night, alone in the captain's quarters, larger than anywhere I'd lived aboard ship, with a desk and a bed and a window overlooking the flight deck, I unpacked the few personal items I'd brought. The photo of my father. The photo of young Ethan saluting in his oversized Navy hat. My father's chief petty officer anchor, the one they'd given me at his funeral. And something new, a framed copy of the commendation Admiral Keene had presented me a decade ago. I hung them where I could see them from my desk. Reminders of where I came from, what I'd survived, what I was trying to become. The Vigilance engines rumbled beneath me, the ship alive even pier-side. In 3 days, we'd sail. And I'd be responsible for everything, every sailor's safety, every mission's success, every decision that mattered. I thought about Lieutenant Blake, hiding a scared boy and hoping she was making the right choice. About Commander Blake, building a career on the foundation of that choice. About Captain Blake, commanding the ship where it all started. All the same person. All the same values. Just different chapters in a story that was still being written. My father had told me once, "The Navy's bigger than you, Sarah. It'll outlast you, outlast me, outlast everyone we know. The question isn't whether you'll matter to the Navy. It's whether the Navy will matter to you, whether you'll serve it in a way that makes you proud when you're old and looking back." I was proud. Not because I'd made captain, though that mattered, but because I'd done it without compromising who I was. Because I'd proven that integrity and advancement weren't mutually exclusive. Because a scared 7-year-old boy had grown into a confident 17-year-old midshipman, partly because I'd chosen humanity over protocol when it counted. That was worth more than rank. That was legacy. I pulled out my logbook, the personal one I kept separate from official records, and wrote the first entry as commanding officer, day 1. The Vigilant feels like home and unknown territory simultaneously. The crew seems eager, morale is solid, and the ship is ready. I'm ready too, I think. Or as ready as anyone can be for this responsibility. Goal: run the ship with honor and competence. Remember that leadership means making hard calls, but never forgetting there are people affected by those calls. Be the captain that Lieutenant Blake needed 10 years ago. Be the example that future officers can follow without sacrificing their conscience. No pressure. I smiled at my own sarcasm, closed the logbook, and looked out at the flight deck one more time before sleep. 10 years ago, I'd nearly lost everything on the ship. Now I commanded it. Sometimes the Navy breaks you. Sometimes it reveals you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very stubborn, it gives you a second chance to prove you were right all along. This was mine. And I intended to make the most of it. That day taught me something the Navy never could. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. What about you? Have you ever risked your job, your reputation, or your comfort just to stand by your conscience? Do you think protocol should ever come before compassion? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story hit home, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded integrity still matters.